Stoichiometry is defined as a relationship between the relative quantities taking part in a reaction or forming a compound.
Within stoichiometry, there is always a limiting reactant. The limiting reactant is the reactant that gets consumed first in a chemical reaction and therefore limits how much products can be formed. For instance, when given 4 car bodies and 20 tires, the car bodies are the limiting reactant because there are enough tires to continue forming the product of a car, but not enough car bodies to continue.
The double displacement balance equation we created was 2KOH plus CuSO4 turns into K2SO4 plus CuOH2.
Therefore, we will be completing this reaction to find the limiting reactant between both substances. To start this reaction, we initially filled 1 beret with 0.2 M potassium hydroxide and 0.1 M of copper sulfate.
Then we took notes of the appearance of the reactants and products. The CuSO4 or copper reactant is a blue, clear liquid, and the KOH or potassium is a clear, water-like substance that is see-through as well.
We then dispensed 5 milliliters of copper sulfate into all 8 test tubes and increasingly added 1 milliliter of potassium hydroxide into each test tube.
Consequently, we added varying amounts of H2O, or water, into each test tube to create a solution of 13 milliliters of liquid in each tube. For instance, we added 7 milliliters of distilled water into test tube 1 because we already had a total of 6 milliliters of liquid in the tube, and so on.
Then we mixed each test tube with our spatula and waited 15 minutes for the precipitate to settle.
Initially, we observed that all the test tubes were a clear blue. However, after waiting the 15 minutes, the darker bluish green chunk of precipitate formed at the top. After waiting the 15 minutes, our group found there was an increase in precipitate in test tubes 1 to 4. Then it leveled off within test tubes 5 till 8. The liquid above the precipitate is a supernatant, as a supernatant is defined as the liquid above the solid residue of precipitation or crystallization.
After conducting this lab, we found that the precipitate levels leveled off in test tubes 5, 6, 7, and 8 because the limiting reactant changes from potassium hydroxide to copper sulfate.
Initially, the limiting reactant is KOH in test tubes 1, 2, 3, and 4 because its values are increasing amounts limiting the reaction. However, in test tubes 5 through 8, there's a leveling off of the precipitate because CuSO4 remains the same, therefore limiting the reaction.
There were sources of error within this experiment as our group B received an incline within the products, which is incorrect. We infer this occurred because of us initially putting the liquid into the beakers rather than straight into the test tubes, which leaves room for error.
Thank you. We hope you enjoyed our presentation.